So, good morning everyone. I'm Sonakshi and I'm currently working as an assistant professor in Indian Institute of Management, Sirmaur. The study that I'm going to present today is actually first essay from my dissertation. So my advisor is also a co-author in the paper, as well as I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to work with Professor Dirk. So a lot of the credit in terms of specifically with respect to how the study has elevated in the last few months goes to him. So without much delay, I'll start with the presentation. The presentation is titled Unraveling Servant Leadership, Underlying Factors. So if we look at how Greenleaf defines servant leadership, he emphasized on two important aspects. The first being that a servant leader leads, or the need for a servant leader to lead originates from their need to serve. Now, many researchers post that build as well as published papers wherein they focus on the need to serve being the distinguishing feature between a servant leader and other similar leadership styles. The second focus of Greenleaf, or emphasis of Greenleaf, was majorly on followers' well-being as well as their needs being met. Because this paper is focused, the main agenda of the paper is integration and clarification of the construct of servant leadership. We went back to the propounder's definition because basically this is the foundation on which the current literature of servant leadership is resting on, right? So let's see how the construct has evolved over the years. So when we talk about how servant leadership has evolved over the years, there have been different phases through which the construct has evolved. So the first phase, which was the conceptual phase, was wherein papers based majorly on the conceptual aspect of servant leadership were researched and published. The second phase was majorly on the model measurement models. So different scales how to measure servant leadership were researched and published. And then the last phase was on model development and testing theories. So for example, proposing certain relationships with outcome of servant leadership, the moderators, the mediators. So that is currently where we are. After a thorough literature review, we felt that there is a need to integrate the construct of servant leadership. I'll explain how it is. So this, don't worry, you don't need to read the slide. I'll just focus on two aspects. So there are variables. So these are different conceptualizations at the left-hand side along with its variables. So there are variables such as vision, which are common in multiple conceptualizations. Similarly, there are other variables such as humility, which is again common between multiple conceptualization. However, on the other side, if you look at it, there are variables such as courage, forgiveness, egalitarianism, which is unique to its own conceptualization, which basically means that, let's say, egalitarianism was used just by Reed et al. 2011. Now, when we did this analysis, when we went through this literature review, we felt that the construct desperately needs to be integrated, and there needs to come some sort of clarity as to what servant leadership is all about. So before we move on to that, I would also like to talk a little bit about why is there a need to study servant leadership. Firstly, because it's a follower-centric leadership style. Secondly, because there have been different review papers as well as meta-analyses where they focus a lot on the positive aspect of servant leadership. Now, if we as researchers as well as practitioners want to harness this positive impact of servant leadership, we need to work more and focus more on the servant leadership developmental aspect. Thirdly, because there are extensive number of models and measurement scales for servant leadership with varying perspective. However, there has been very few attempts to consolidate all these varying insights, which is wherein we feel that some more clarity in terms of the construct as well as integrating the construct would make more sense, and it will actually sort of strengthen the servant leadership theory. Yeah, so let's talk about the research gap. This issue of lack of coherence, clarity, lack of integration is actually arising because different researchers came up with their own model, their own definitions of servant leadership, which eventually led to a lack of clarity, coherence, and actually obstructed its theory development. Apart from that, a very recent paper which also identifies the same literature gap as we do, they focus on that the lack of understanding the proper structure of servant leadership has not only hindered the theoretical development but also the accumulation of all the research findings that we have currently with different research papers on servant leadership. And additionally, there are papers which also talk about how the research is fragmented across different disciplines, and we need to integrate it. So for this particular paper, the research objective was to clarify the concept of servant leadership and integrate the concept of servant leadership through creation of a servant leadership dictionary. So that is what we did in this particular study. So let's talk about the method. The method was adopted by McKinney, Short and Payne 2013, who created a similar dictionary for another construct. There are 8 different steps in this particular method. We'll quickly go by each of these steps. So the first step was to select an appropriate text to analyze. For this, we selected different conceptualization of servant leadership along with acceptance speeches of Nobel Peace Prize laureates. The second step was to collect a sample of these selected texts to create a word list. So in the study, we eventually ended up with 17 different conceptualizations of model of servant leadership. Apart from, addition to that, we also considered 10 different acceptance speeches of Nobel Peace Prize laureates. Now I'll just quickly explain about the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So we wanted a very comprehensive dictionary of servant leadership which covers varying perspective, varying different directions, and hence we wanted to cover both theoretical models as well as the measurement scales. So the right hand side, these are the theoretical models, the 5 theoretical models that were considered. If you look at it, these are the initial conceptual papers which basically set the foundation on which the scales were built. When it comes to measurement scale, we initially thought of, we started with considering the 16 scales which were analyzed in EVA et al. 2019. However, after closer analysis, we felt 4 of those scales not very useful for our study, majorly because they were not adding anything new in the study. Hence, we excluded those 4 studies. I mean, I can tell one by point also why we excluded it, but in a crux, that was the reason. Yeah. So the third step is to develop an inductive word list. Now, I'll explain how this word list was created. So on first level of analysis, there are variables such as trust, altruism, which are common for multiple conceptualization, which basically means because different researchers are discussing it, they are keeping that in their model, it means it is relevant to the construct of servant leadership. On second level of hence what we do is we use trust and altruism as one dimension in a study. On second level of analysis, we find that there are variables such as commitment to growth of people, helping subordinates grow and succeed. On closer analysis, we found that they both are talking about the same thing. However, they use different variables or different words to denote the same. Again, we use helping subordinates grow and succeed as a dimension, as a separate dimension in the studies. Again, going by the same logic because different researchers are considering that in their research, so that has to be relevant for this construct. On third level of analysis, we found that there are variables such as stewardship, organizational stewardship, as well as there are variables such as service and servanthood. Now, an umbrella term like stewardship perhaps will cover both stewardship and organizational stewardship. Similarly, an umbrella term like service will perhaps cover both servanthood and service. So again, going by the same logic, we use service and stewardship as a separate dimension in the study. Once we are done with these 3 levels of analysis, what we do is we analyze each and every variable for all the studies that we considered. So there were 17 conceptualizations, and we try to ascertain whether that particular variable can be used as a specific dimension or a word under a specific dimension. So for example, let's say if empathy becomes a specific dimension, words like caring for others, words like listening could be considered as a word under that specific dimension. Okay. So this process ended up with 18 dimensions. Let's talk about step 4. So these are the 18 dimensions. At this step, to give the process more objectivity, we calculated Crippen or alpha, which is one form of inter-rater reliability, wherein we used 2 different judges. These judges they had experience in qualitative research extensively, as well as they had good knowledge about servant leadership as a topic. So what we did was we gave them the word list as well as the acceptance speeches, and they were given complete freedom and autonomy They could add a new word under a specific dimension, they could delete a word from a specific dimension, or if the need be, they could shift one word from one dimension to another dimension. Once this process was done, there were certain discrepancies that arose. We had a meeting with the judges as well as the authors. Some of these discrepancies got resolved and ironed out in the process, but still there were certain discrepancies for which we calculated Krippendorf alpha. For all the dimensions, it was more than 0.8, so we could retain all the dimensions. So after step 4, we have step 5, which is basically soliciting additional words from the judges. At this particular stage, we gave the word list to the two judges and asked them if they felt there is any word which we have perhaps overlooked or we have missed. They did not suggest any additional words, and these were the same judges that we used in the last step. Going to the sixth step, which is measuring the construct in sample text and preparing the data for analysis. So as of now, we have 18 dimensions and we have words under each of these dimensions. This step includes adding synonyms to those dimensions. So as Short et al. Specifies, we added synonyms for each of those words under for those dimensions using the Rodale's synonym finder. Once that was done, once all the synonyms were added, our word list was finally complete. So we created user dictionaries for all the 18 dimensions in the diction software. This is just an example for one of those dimensions. Similarly, we had all the 18 dimensions for which we had created the user dictionaries. This basically includes all the steps that we covered till now. Now post this was 7th step, which is to assess the factor structure. So what we did was, we took last 5 decades of acceptance speeches of Nobel laureates and we ran it into the dictions, standard analysis into the diction, and each of those analysis gave us score for 18 dimensions. So for all the speeches that we were considering for the last 5 decades, we had these 18 scores. Once we had the data, we ran an EFA, exploratory factor analysis, which ended up in 4 factors. So the first factor was named building community, which includes these 9 variables or dimensions. The second factor was named encouraging people's potentials, which included these 5 dimensions. The third one was named altruistic orientation, which included altruistic calling and persuasion. And the last one included, the last one was named self-aware steward, which included awareness and stewardship. So this is, these 2 slides are important because this is the major contribution of the study. This is how we are saying that we are integrating the construct of servant leadership. Let's move to the last step, which is to assess validity and reliability. We refer to Short et al. Because this particular paper focuses majorly and exclusively on computer-aided text analysis, which is essentially what we are doing in the study. So we checked for content validity, external validity, and discriminant validity. Content validity was checked through the step 4 and 5, which is inter-data reliability, as well as soliciting additional words from the judges. The external validity was done through. So basically, we had to test the dictionary on 2 different samples or 2 different corpuses. So the first corpus, obviously being the acceptance speeches of Nobel laureates, and the second one being the presidential speeches by 15 different American presidents, which I'll discuss in the next slide. And thirdly, we also established discriminant validity, which is done through conducting a exploratory factor analysis or a conformity factor analysis, which was covered in the last slide. Moving on to the external validity. So these are Nobel speeches as well as State of Union speeches for 15 American presidents from 1933 to 2024. And so what we did was, for all of these presidents, we also calculated their 18 dimension scores, and we got a servant leadership score for each of these presidents. And based on the scores that they got, we created their servant leadership rank. Before I before we analyze this further, I would just like to clarify something. So we are not saying that these presidents are or are not servant leaders. We are saying the speeches that they've used, what servant leadership score is for those speeches. And additionally, I mean, all of these speeches, are designed to serve a purpose. So some of those speeches are, remembered for centuries. For instance, I have a dream, but there are other speeches which might be forgotten, the next day. So when we did this analysis, the three bottom scorers were Trump, Johnson, and Biden, whereas the three top scorers were Truman, Roosevelt, and Nixon. So yes, this is the last slide, which focuses on contribution and future research. So the contribution of the paper, the basic contribution of the paper is providing the integration and the clarity of the servant leadership concept through the dictionary that we created. From a methodological perspective, the study also serve as a motivation for creating more dictionaries, because personally I face this problem. There are not many studies wherein dictionary creation is, the process of dictionary creation is presented. As far as future research is concerned, the dictionary that has been created can be published for wider use. So once you have that access to that dictionary, even you can run any text analysis, any reader, any speech through that dictionary. Secondly, obviously, once we have, if we publish the dictionary, one can analyze different leaders and classify them as servant leaders or not servant leaders. And although the third future research, although we never started with this objective, which was scale creation, but the objective was from the start the integration and the clarification of the concept. But this study could be used or could be seen as first step in the process of scale development of a new scale. So that's about it from my side. I have certain questions which I would seek. I mean, you can ask any questions if you have. Additionally, these are certain questions that I would seek inputs from.